Hillary Clinton talked a few years ago, and was made fun of course, about, and some of you may remember this, a vast right-wing conspiracy. And she was only wrong in one way. It's not a conspiracy. When you do things in the open, there's nothing, you can't call it a conspiracy. But going back over, and we're not talking about crackpots in the John Birch Society, people like that, although they seem to be in the ascendancy now. That's a relatively temporary phenomenon in the history of the country. I mean, that's gone on before. Father Coughlin, some of you students of history, in the 1930s, a priest who was actually, I think, kicked out of the church because he was embracing racist ideas and so forth in this very popular radio show, the Rush Limbaugh of his day. The second problem is the degradation of our news media. Now, I think there may be a solution to some of these things, but it's a serious problem. And we'll start with Fox, because that's the easy one. There's a difference between Fox and MSNBC. They're both biased. The New York Times is biased. The Wall Street Journal is biased. The New York Post is biased. The newspapers have bias. The Pittsburgh Post is certainly biased. Or is it the Tribune? I've forgotten which one is which one's the right-wing paper here. Okay. But they're both biased. You can't pick up any paper without the personal opinions of the reporter, whether it's on the left or the right, getting into the article. It's true. Go read the New York Times. You can do this with, I think the New York Times agrees with me most of the time, so I, of course, think they're great, right? But if you read this, whatever the story is, I'm sure there's some political story on the front page of the New York Times today. By the third or fourth paragraph, the reporter is ushering in their own opinion. Bias is not the problem. It's something that makes us mad, but it's not the problem. It's when you become a propaganda outlet. What Fox News says is often not true, and they know it's not true, and they say it anyway. It is not a news organization. It is a very expensive, incredibly well-funded right-wing propaganda organization. The definition of propaganda is you take something with a small kernel of truth to it, you add, you twist, and you make it into a story. The death panels is a perfect example. And I forgive Sarah Palin for doing this. I mean, I don't think she's going to be president of the United States, and politicians can say things, and anybody can say anything they want. But I don't forgive a supposed news organization who put that out every single day knowing it was a lie. There was a really interesting poll at the end of the Bush era, towards the end of the Bush era, the second Bush era. It showed that 65% of people who watched Fox believed that Saddam Hussein had something to do with al-Qaeda's attack on the World Trade Centers. 13% of NPR listeners believed that. The President of the United States, George Walker Bush, was asked whether that was true or not. And he said no. Saddam Hussein had nothing to do with the attack on the World Trade Centers. The reason that 65% of the people who viewed Fox and got their news from Fox believed that was not because they were dumb, it's because they were lied to every single day on virtually every program on Fox News. I think we've crossed a line here that has redefined the media. And it's not just Fox. I pick on Fox because they're the best funded and because they have a clear mission. I mean, this is another thing that Fox has done, which I've never seen done before. They gave $1 million to the Republican Governors Association. How can you pretend to be a news organization while you're funding a political party? So the news has debased itself and cut back its ability to do even the little decent job that it does. Now, I happen to like Brian Williams as a person. We love Katie Couric. That's who we happen to watch because I think her tone is more uplifting and she's likely to have a more balanced approach to things. But these programs are shadows of their former selves, and I think the American people are not being well served by a media that seeks the lowest common denominator because it's entirely profit-based. So that's a core institution. Look, I'm a professional media hater, right? I'm a politician. I never got a break from the media. The scream speech, right? They dress it all up. Anybody in the room at the scream speech? Anybody was in Iowa at the scream speech? Nobody here? Okay. Well, it was very different. It didn't quite sound the way it did by the time Fox got done with it. So I have every reason to dislike them, and I can tell you great, fun horror stories, and maybe in the Q&A period I will. The entire amount of growth in the economy of the United States of America has occurred in the top 20% of wage earners. The top 1% of Americans owns twice as much as a percentage of America than they did 20 years ago. And that, of course, has to come from somebody else. And it comes from the people who aren't in the top 1%. When George Bush, who was obviously, arguably the most conservative president we've had since Calvin Coolidge, came into the White House, there was one state in the country with marriage equality, which was mine. When he left the White House, there were 9. Why is that? You had this conservative, and for 6 of those 8 years that President Bush was in office, the House and the Senate and the White House were all controlled by the Republicans, the conservative party. How could this be? People who elected Barack Obama were under 35 years old. The first election in my lifetime where more people under 35 voted than who were over 35. When I was, not very long ago actually, charter schools were a creation of the right. Charter schools were created originally to maintain segregation in the South to avoid the anti-discrimination stuff that was coming out of the courts, and then to attack the teachers' unions.